what have we seen with this virus epidemic? I think we've seen four things. And the first is the federal government flat out failed us in planning for this. If you have an emergency and they don't know what, when, or where, it could be an earthquake, a tornado, certainly a pandemic. By the time it happens, it's too late. We have a fellow candidate, Ken Armstrong, who was the head of emergency planning at the Port of Los Angeles. And he's a good libertarian. They were planned. So when they had an earthquake 3 years later, I accused him of causing the earthquake, but they were ready. He showed how planning would help. They failed us in that. Number two, we have seen that politicians have protected themselves politically. And how is that? Oh, I'm a mayor, I'm a governor. I'm going to make sure that you stay healthy. I'm going to do everything I can, including decimating the economy. But if you stay healthy, then I was successful. I'm a hero. No, that's not the right way. Or if you get sick, well, then I did everything I could, so it's not my fault. They decimated the economy. There was no balance. Tens of millions of people lost their job. Wouldn't have happened under libertarian approach. Hundreds of thousands of businesses have collapsed, many probably not to return, not even a part of the balance, not a part of the discussion. So we also saw that we have regulators being finally forced to step aside and let the healthcare officials do their work. Mr. Hornberger was right. We need that separation between the government and healthcare. Back in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have government involved at all. We had no problem with emergency rooms staying open, reasonable prices, reasonable good care. Then the government starts getting involved. And now what do we see? Basically, if you want to see your equivalent of the Department of Motor Vehicles running your healthcare, that's where we're going. In fact, P.J. O'Rourke, I think, said, if you think that healthcare is expensive now, wait till it's free. So these are things that we need to look at. By the way, the Constitution does not allow the FDA or the CDC to be dictatorial. They're not elected officials. Let's pare them back and make them advisory. That's what I would do. Sure, this is a critically important issue. We have too many schools failing our children all around the country. Many, of course, in lower economic areas, many, of course, then with minorities there. By the way, talk about the private sector. I wrote a musical called Americans All, and it's helped to mentor education and high school and junior high school students. Go to judgejimgray.com and you can find Americans All there. Listen to the music. But we need to ask ourselves two fundamental questions. The first is, what is the purpose of the educational system? Number one, to educate our children. What a concept. Or number two, to protect below average teachers. And guess what we've been doing today? Because competition is not a part. The other question actually is, who is in a better position to decide where and how your children should be educated? You as the parents or the government? And I've never heard anybody say anything other than it's the parents. So empower, that's the word I mean to use, empower the parents to choose where their government money is going to be spent for the education of their children, and they will choose excellence. It's happened in Milwaukee, it's happening in Indiana, happening in numbers of places in Florida and around the world. Competition works. So we will then pretty soon make, in effect, just out of passion, the public school system. They'll either get better or they'll go out of business. Competition works, and it's so failing today. We have public schools that are top heavy with administration. Not true in private schools. We have numbers of people who really should be in vocational schools. The parents know that, no, you're not going to be a doctor of economics. You should be getting a skill, becoming a mechanic, a plumber, whatever. The parents would know this. Competition would make this happen. We've strayed away from that badly. Libertarians will bring choice back. By the way, no form of laws outlawing homeschooling, outlawing school choice, that is anathema, that is wrong, and we must obliterate those laws. Other than that, I have no opinions whatsoever. We have inflicted so many encumbrances upon our system, basically done politically. You know, we should be allowed to do telemedical work, to unchain these things, to have healthcare workers. One maybe small thing, but would certainly reduce the cost of medicines, is to have, okay, today we have prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs. We should also have behind-the-counter drugs, so pharmacists could, in effect, talk with the patient one-to-one and then tell him, her, what drug, what prescription would work the best. If you have to go first to a medical doctor, it just drives up the cost. Artificially done by the government. No, the government does not create these things. The FDA, by the way, it is keeping pharmaceuticals from coming on the market for 10 years, 10 years, and as well as it costs something in the order of $2 billion. Look, if a pharmaceutical is working well enough in Germany, that really ought to be good enough for us. And if it isn't, then use the civil justice system to hold people accountable, but get the market out of it. We have simply seen costs unnecessarily skyrocket because we have thwarted competition. Back in the 50s and 60s, we had it. And then, basically what we're doing, do you think that the veterans are being well served by the VA hospital? Do you all want to be served by the VA hospital? I don't think so. Do you want to be served by your family doctor where you know in advance what the costs are going to be? Today they're hidden. No, that should be open. So bring in that competition. We have really good medical care for reasonable quality prices in two areas today in our country, medical. Number one is LASIK eye surgery, and the other is cosmetic surgery. Why? Because the government's not involved. Learn a lesson. Go back to that system where we will again get quality. We'll get excellence. That's the libertarian way. We must normalize this. The first thing I must say is that closing down our borders is simply wrong, not right. It's not American. Number two, we have people around the world that would like our forefathers, come here to pursue the American dream, and bless them. We are a nation of immigrants, and immigration has made us great. But I would actually issue work visas to them pretty generally, pretty easily, maybe with background checks with regard to criminal justice issues, mental health, even terrorists, if you would. But then they could come here, they'd be normalized, they could live normal lives, they could go back and forth across the border as they desired, they could have a driver's license, get insurance, etc., not be taken advantage by the system. But no welfare would be attached to that. In addition, we need to stop. Let's focus on this one for a minute. We need to stop creating causes why people are fleeing from their own homes to come here as refugees. Simply do away with the war on drugs, which has wreaked havoc all around the world, Latin America, Afghanistan, wherever. Stop those. Stop sending our troops all in foreign wars that create these refugees. It's all part of it. They're fleeing from the violence that our policies have caused. We need to recognize that. And finally, we need to have a reasonable path towards citizenship. Look, it's so cumbersome, it takes so long, it's rooted with real problems. I'm proud to say that I adopted a son from Vietnam when I was there in the Navy and brought him here, and we were able to naturalize him and get him his citizenship pretty quickly. Maybe I got preference because I was a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office at that time, but we need to normalize this. We are a nation of immigrants. Let's bring them under the law, and then we will all treat each other as brothers that we are. Well, I've been involved in the criminal justice system pretty much all of my professional life. And actually last April, I started hosting a radio podcast called All Rise, the Libertarian Way with Judge Jim Gray. Actually, Larry Sharp gave me the All Rise idea from a judgeship. But in that time, I think it was on November 8th of last year, I interviewed an attorney named Justin Brooks, who is the head of the Innocence Project in San Diego. And what he said was appalling to all of us, which was he himself, in the last 20 years, has walked 29 people out of prison who were factually innocent. And that should outrage us all. If we have one person in prison that's factually innocent, that's really a terrible thing. So many. And why? Because we have all of these laws on mandatory minimum sentences and 3 strikes and you're out and enhancements and the rest. No, I tell prosecutors, we will tell prosecutors in my administration, you're speaking for us, you'll do the right thing for the right reason every time. In addition, back in 1992, talk about trying to repeal the war on drugs. I took that position as a sitting trial court judge. Judges don't hold press conferences, but that is my position. Now I say that the war on drugs, drug prohibition, is the biggest failed policy in the history of the United States of America, second only to slavery. In addition, today, the United States of America, you probably don't know this, has 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. This is an outrage. Either we're doing the most criminally oriented people in the world or we're doing something wrong. What do you think it is? So let's look at this and understand we really should keep our prison space for people we're afraid of, not people we're mad at. Victimless crimes, like all of my competitors are saying here. That's right. We just don't do that. Finally, I was involved with something called Open Gate International, and they teach former felons now released from prison. They teach them to be involved in the culinary arts, chefs, maitre d's, etc. And they don't charge for the time, and they're successful in getting about 75% of those jobs within the 12-week period.
5 seconds.
Now we took it to Norco State Prison, where they're trying to set up a program to teach these people before they're released. That's where the root of the problem is. That's what libertarians do. We address them. We are going to be able to help you with all of those things, positions just taken, because Larry Sharpe and I are going to change the American culture to make the accessibility, understandable practicality of libertarian approaches much more acceptable and understood. Yes, we have a problem with taxation. We're going to reduce the size of the government, reduce its costs noticeably. If you ever want to get discouraged, read the Federal's Plum Book, like the fruit, and it has hundreds of pages in there where it presidential appointment positions ratified by Congress, many of them, each one something on the order of $186,000 a year, probably plus benefits. We must call attention to it. You show people what's actually going on, they'll actually implement what we're talking about here, but we will actually change that culture. We will help the down ballot candidates. We will get libertarianism sweeping the country for reasons that we've just heard. That's our plan. That's what we will do.
Carl Krambeck asks, what is Jim Gray's version of UBI?
Oh, well, I'd adopt Milton Friedman's. He called it a negative income tax, but we're compassionate people, not because we have to, but because we would supply money for people. Then get rid of all other welfare. So they would always have an incentive to work. For example, just for numbers illustration, that if somebody makes no money, no one would be taxed at all on their first $30,000 of income. And then if they would get a stipend of $15,000 a year, basically broken into $1,250 monthly payments, then they would have an incentive, because for every dollar they would earn, they would lose 50 cents of their stipend. That is simply putting into effect the logical idea of benefiting from your labors. And also, by the way, it's a serious blight on who we are, I believe, as a country with regard to the homeless issues. Yes, many of them are veterans, many are mentally ill, but if they were to have that money in their accounts, then the private sector would quickly start making fairly inexpensive room and board facilities available, and you could use the private sector to address this on an institutional basis. Right now, our politicians just feel guilty and throw money at the issue and then ride off and do other good deeds. Institutionalizing it, doing away with all other welfare, the food stamps, the bureaucracy, and the rest. Milton Friedman called it a negative income tax. I don't like the word negative, but a stipend would do it. So that would be my address. And by the way, then, with a graduated flat tax, we could turn in our tax returns by a postcard. About a week or two ago, I signed my tax return. I'm modestly intelligent. I don't even understand what it was that I was signing. We need to get rid of the intrusion, the cost, the power, like my comrade said, of the IRS, pare them back to nothing. And we can do that, setting up with Larry Sharpe, Mr. Libertarian, in my view, setting up a culture in which people will begin to understand the benefits of what we're talking about. We won't scare them. We'll just bring them into this. They will become fans. We will grow the Libertarian Party and grow the libertarian ideals. That's what Gray Sharpe 2020 stands for. Come join us. You'll see.
And Dan Valentine says, how would Judge Gray work to resolve the climate change crisis as president?
That's a very good question, and certainly on people's minds. The private sector does so much better job at addressing these climate problems. Again, on my podcast, I invited the Nature Conservancy, and they talked about all the good things they're doing. Government throws money at it. Government ends up with, these funds to fix supposedly polluted places. They run out of money. They get the people that were polluters off the hook. No, you bring in a civil justice system where the victims can sue the polluters. And then they probably get insurance. The polluter's going to have to be careful because their insurance companies will make sure that they don't get that exposure. The private system will work. The public system, it's oh, poor baby. Oh, go back to Milton Friedman, who said that we've got to judge our programs by their success, not their good intentions. That would be a positive revolution in our country, because the government is woeful with regard to success on environmental issues. They overdo things. They let exceptions for their cronies. No, the civil justice system where victims can speak up. You polluted my well. You polluted the upper river that now is affecting me. It's a little harder with the air, but you can still do it. And certainly if you come in and dump things on my property, I will be able to bring charges against you. We will be able to do that. And again, the voluntary community. We have these trash heaps out in plastics in the Pacific Ocean, et cetera. You know, let's make it so that the private industry has some benefits in put a bounty on tons of plastic. If that's what's happening, the private sector will work. And by the way, let me say in my couple of seconds left that I think Mr. Hornberger complimented me rather severely by getting desperate and saying that I supported these $1 trillion things. I don't do that at all. But Mr. Hornberger, we do need a military. It doesn't come from charity. We need some things in government, and so government's going to need some money. I'm going to cut it back enormously. That's my position.